What is up, everybody? My name is Raymond Summerlin. This is the Sharp Angles podcast, a very special edition of the Sharp Angles podcast. No, we will not be dealing with a societal issue like your favorite 80s sitcom, but we are going to be talking about the 2024 football preview, a preview book that has just come out at sharpfootballanalysis.com. It is available to you. You can go and check it out. Make sure you head over there. You can just search Sharp Football Preview Book on Google. It'll show up. It's available everywhere you're looking for it. Make sure you go and check that out. If we're a little bit loopy, if we get a little bit wild today on this episode, you'll understand why. We've been working on this for a very long time. I mean, Warren's been just in the mixer. He's just been in the war room working on this for several months. And so we're really excited about it. It's 559 pages of all of the football information you need for the 2024 season. And so we're going to go through some of the more interesting things from that book, some of the things we're interested in after writing that book. And I'm going to be doing that with two of the main contributors to the book, and that is Warren Sharp and Rich Hribar. Rich, I'm going to go to you first, because I imagine once Warren starts talking about his love child that is the preview book, it's going to be for a while. I want to talk about your tears.
Look at him over there. He's firing. He's still firing texts off, just talking to everybody about the book.
Just tweet city. But I do want to talk about your tiers, because as we transition here into July, we're really transitioning into the bulk and the meat of our fantasy football schedule, our fantasy football draft kit. Starting with your tiers, the quarterback tiers are already out. The tight end tiers are already out. The running back tiers will be out on Wednesday, which is today as we're recording this. And then I just got the email for the wide receiver tiers, and I haven't opened it yet, but I have to be honest with you. The quarterback tiers were 20,000 words. The running back tiers were a little bit more than that. And you didn't call either of those massive. And then you called the wide receiver tiers massive. And I am genuinely concerned about what my afternoon holds. So did you check how many words are these wide receiver tiers end up going to be?
I don't want to speak it out loud. You just have to open the file and see. I do want to say Cheers is also the best 80s sitcom. And then, it's interesting because Warren probably also the book comes out for Warren, right? Like the book is out. There's probably this huge, massive weight off of his shoulders. There's an excitement. He feels some relief over the summer. And I opened my schedule and I'm like, I have 30 more articles to write before the start of the season. And it's kind of a transition period where we get the book out. Warren has this sigh of relief, and you and I are now in season mode.
Yeah, no, it's wild. We were looking at, actually earlier today, we were looking at the content calendar, and it's just chock full of things that are coming up, which I'm excited about. We're going to have a lot of great information out there, a lot of great stuff coming out. And so I'm definitely excited about it and excited what we're going to get to see. But today's about the book. Today is about the 2024 football preview from Warren Sharp, his pride and joy, his off-season love letter to the NFL. And I think Rich's point about how happy you are, you do seem much more energetic and happier this week now that the book's out and you could just run around talking about it. Is that fair?
Very fair. Very fair. Look, this book is, you guys spend months working on it as well. So it's not like I'm the only one who spends months working on it, but I wish I could push some of this stuff off on even more people, because that would make my life a lot easier, especially assembling it all and pulling it all together there at the last bit and building page by page. But I still, as I did 5-6 years ago, I still build every single page, figure out which text is going to go onto which page. I deal with all the little details at the very end of it as well. But it's Rich is exactly right. I mean, he hit the nail on the head. This book is the end result of months and months of work. And when I'm done with it, I certainly am relieved, relaxed. It allows me to do shows like this. And we've got a lot of good announcements that we're going to be dropping to you guys throughout the course of this hour. But there's going to be a lot more shows that I'm going to continue to do with you guys. The book is phenomenal, and I'll just go ahead and say it. If you haven't bought the book, go to sharp.football and get yourself a copy of the book. It's 559 pages full of analysis of everything that we learned from last season and what we think is going to happen this upcoming season. You could get it. It's on early bird discount right now. That early bird discount is not going to last long. So it's $29.99 right now. I guarantee you will not find a more comprehensive resource to utilize for understanding the teams, the coaches, the situations, the expectations, betting and fantasy all wrapped into one package than you will with this book. It is, I mean, I will put my stamp on it, and I say this every single year, and nobody has truthfully taken me up on it. If you find a better resource out there that will get you more prepared in a faster way for this upcoming season, that's more comprehensive than what we're offering, then you can come back and I'll give you your money back. I am that confident that this book is the go-to resource and the guide for you. And that's why so many people love it. They read it annually. It's a tradition of theirs. It'll become a new tradition of yours if you haven't bought it yet. But I'm excited to talk about it with you guys, and we're going to talk about some of the teams and a little bit more about the book as well.
Yeah, and I do want to throw out there that we're actually giving away 2 free copies of the book to anybody who goes to Warren's Twitter account at @SharpFootball on Twitter. His pinned tweet there is the announcement of the book that he tweeted out yesterday. Go and quote tweet Warren's announcement tweet. Again, it's pinned to his Twitter account. Make sure you do that. And I know that there will be many more giveaways coming out over the course of the next month. So we're really excited about it. We want to get it in people's hands so y'all can see, exactly how good it is. I do think that leads us into talking about kind of the process of the book and kind of what's all in there, because it grows every year. Last year it was 532 pages. This year it's 559 pages. It just grows and grows and grows. We're adding more and more to each team chapter. We're adding more and more to the book ahead of the team chapter. We've got some really interesting things in there about the hip drop tackle and how that might affect the season and might affect scoring in the season from Joe Gibbs. We've got, fantasy lessons from Rich Hribar. We've just got all sorts of interesting stuff in there. So I guess we just kind of start with that, Warren. What's in the book? What's kind of your process of arriving there, and why do you think it's so useful to people, I suppose?
Yeah, I am a firm believer in rejecting the Bill Parcellsism, you are what your record says you are, because most teams are not what the record actually was last year. There's so much behind the scenes that was occurring to allow that team to arrive at the number of wins and losses that they had. So one of the first processes is you got to strip away all the luck factors. The one-score game results that are in many cases arbitrary. You look at how often these teams were actually leading at halftime, how often these teams had comeback wins in the fourth quarter. You're stripping out fumble luck. You're stripping out other types of turnover luck, field goal luck even. How often were your opponents making more field goals based upon the distance than they should have been making, or missing more than they should have missed. And all these tend to then lead into this is why this team had a result like they did last year. We look at the schedule. How many difficult opponents did you play last year? What was your record against the teams that were difficult? And so once you understand what a team is, you peel back all the luck and you get an understanding is this is what this team was last year, and this was their philosophy, and this is how they arrived at their actual record. Then you can look at what did they change since that point in time? New coaches, new coordinators, new players, the draft picks, free agency. You go through all of that, and then you look at what is their schedule this year, because schedule, like it or not, does end up dictating a lot of how you're going to be able to perform. We sometimes the media sometimes looks at the wrong types of schedule analyses, and there's only so much you can take from schedule analysis, but you do have to incorporate it to an extent as you're projecting these teams out for this upcoming season. And then there's rest elements to it as well, which we spend a lot of time on. We share in the book every single team's rest edge for every single game, and I discuss in the intro why that's important. We discuss some of the records that teams have when they are really in difficult rest situations. So as you can tell by me describing this process, it takes months to kind of figure out what we're going to say about every single team here. And, there had been a couple of rewrites based upon some news that broke. And so we had to make a couple of adjustments along the way, because we do start early enough that then there are times that we have to go back and rewrite. But that's what makes it good, because the thing is, people ask, Well, why isn't this a printed book? Let's just hit that nail right now. Why can't we just have this printed? Well, because we literally are making changes and adjustments to it on Monday, and then we are getting it in your hands on Tuesday. And there's a lead time if you're going to make a printed book where you're not going to, it takes weeks to actually pencils down, go get the thing organized, and then get it printed. It takes weeks to do that process if you're going through like one of the processes that most companies do when they're selling magazines and newsstands and things of that nature. And we don't really want to do that. We want to be able to work on something and then get it to you right away. Plus the fact that this is 559 pages in its full color makes like printing just a really bear to deal with from a price perspective. And so what we're planning on doing this year is we're planning on giving double the number of printed copies out for free that we did in 2023. So we're trying to get more printed books into people's hands, to your hands, the people that bought the PDFs. So we know you guys want printed books. We understand it. We've heard it loud and clear. The best way for us to try to help get you books is we don't want you to pay the sticker price because that would be an exorbitant amount. But we are going to be doing a lot of these giveaways, including quote tweeting the pin tweet and things of that nature that will help you guys get the printed books. But this is, and then I didn't even mention like your guys' process, right? Like I don't know exactly Rich's process. I know that he finished earlier than usual this year, which is commendable. That's probably why these tiers are so long because he's had a little bit more time to work on those. But he finished earlier than usual. But then Ray and our co-editor have been working on the editing process for this stuff for months as well. Just the editing they've been doing for months. So we're literally working up until we pushed this out yesterday, Tuesday. Monday night, we're working on this thing, getting it into your hands on Tuesday morning. And so that's why it's such a sigh of relief when it's all said and done, because it is a long, time-consuming process, but I don't know any other way. And I'm glad that I'm working with some guys here who feel the same. Like you guys are willing to put in the time and effort to do this. And I think that's why so many people really it resonates with them, like the amount of work that goes into this book.
Yeah, it probably drives Ray a little
I want to
crazy.
mention.
I'll say, Ray has an editing background, so he probably likes, say things in the fewest amount of words possible, right? Like be concise. And me and Warren are not like that. We not write in that capacity. We write like we speak, long-winded answers, and and you get a lot of that in our writing. But one of the reasons we do gel together, though, is we want to provide the most thorough work you can find out there. When we put our stamp on something, we put something out, we want to say, like, yes, you're not going to find anything as comprehensive. That's why when I do my tiers the way I do and send to Ray, like, I don't want to skimp out on that. I don't have to. I mean, I could definitely be a little more concise, but I want to put the most information in there as possible because I want you to come and say, like, if I click on this, like, I'm not going to find anything else like this anywhere else on any other website.
No, absolutely. To the printed book. I'm glad you said we heard you loud and clear. I'm actually in the Scott Fishbowl Fantasy League is going on now, and the drafts are going on. And literally, we pushed the book yesterday, and in the chat for the Scott Fishbowl draft that I'm in, I got, "Hey, is there any way to get a printed copy of the book?" So we have heard you. I too think that I want to make it, you mentioned all the stuff that we have to go through, and that's a lot of the stuff that we're covering in these chapters is, we have the draft class analysis from Ryan McChrystal, who's one of the best in the business at draft stuff. We have, like you said, the referee analysis, the schedule analysis, all of the heat maps, fantasy analysis from Rich. So all of that's in there. I wanted to go through and, like, as we're writing this, as we're going through and talking about this process, we find some interesting things. And I wanted to go through and talk about a few of those with y'all as we go through. And Rich actually brought up, and I think that this is a good place to start. Rich has been talking about the changing way that NFL defenses are playing, and he's been talking about that now for several years. And we've continued to see them, that trend continued. It continued last year. And then the other side, on the offensive side, we continue to see the proliferation, I suppose, of this Shanahan Sean McVay coaching tree. More McVay than Shanahan, but still Shanahan obviously is playing a big role in this as well. And I know you wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that as we move forward and what that might mean coming into this next season, Rich.
Yeah, I mean, when I was doing my team stuff, and I'm someone that always starts, I'm not a fantasy analyst that starts the player and goes there. I'm looking at league-wide trends. I'm looking at, team by team case basis, how this all fits together and how the team's going to operate. And I noticed a lot of the teams that I was, more positively in the write-up for some of the changes they were making because they were doing really kind of crazy archaic things like teams like the Saints, the Titans, the Falcons. And I'm looking at these guys that they hired, and I'm like, this is a clear trend, right? Like we continue to see this expansion of this Shanahan McVay tree. And there's a reason for that I think not just because of the success, and we see like successful teams get poached, continuously over the course of NFL history. But when you look at the way, the opposing defenses are currently like approaching attacking offenses, and since the 2 COVID years, we've had a complete defensive meta. Offensive scoring has been completely kind of nuked and slowed down the last 2 years, seeing a lot more zone coverage. Man coverage has dropped from the season before. In 5 straight seasons, you're getting a lot more match coverage. Blitzing is down. We're getting the middle of the field left open at a higher rate. That's continued to go up in conjunction with like the more zone coverage. And what these 2 coaching trees and these philosophies, and there's some differentiations between them, is these teams are predicated on, no matter how you want to defend them, they are going to attack you in the ways that teams are trying to defend these big play offenses, right? If you want to play 2 high safeties and shell coverage, like they're just going to run the football on you. And then also in the passing game, if you want to come up and play the run, like we're going to attack the middle of the field still. We're going to soak up your linebackers. We're going to throw over the top of them. And I think there's a reason why like these guys keep getting poached and teams want to hire these guys. There were a couple hires that weren't from this coaching tree, and we could probably question those along the way. But I do think when I was writing up positive notes from these transitions, like, the Saints going from Dennis Allen and Pete Carmichael to, Clint Kubiak. And obviously, Clint Kubiak, his dad, played for Mike Shanahan, and, comes from the Shanahan tree. He just worked with Kyle Shanahan last year. And the Saints were dead last, in use of play action, dead last in the NFL in use of pre-snap motion. You have obviously what's gone on with the Titans, and not only the Titans losing Mike Vrabel, but losing Derrick Henry in conjunction with that, right? Like what Derrick Henry invokes an offensive coordinator to run his offense, going to Brian Callahan, bringing in Tyler Boyd and Tony Pollard. Like it's going to be a massive transition. And then obviously going from Arthur Smith to Zach Robinson, there's no more night and day situation as well in those. So like, I just think it's interesting that you see like the NFL be kind of cognizant of saying like this coaching tree has the answers. When you look at the top offenses in the NFL, they're from this coaching tree, man. So like, I think that it's completely smart that teams are doing this. And then I'm looking forward to hopefully some more fantasy points being scored this year as a byproduct of it.
Yeah. And I think I've always been interested in the kind of the Shanahan approach, because I think, I do differentiate here between Shanahan and McVay. I think when you're looking at like Mike McDaniel and Shanahan and Bobby Slowick, that is definitely different than a lot of what we see from the McVay, more of the McVay tree. What I've always found interesting about those offenses is that, well, I think when you think about those offenses, you think about them, especially in San Francisco with Christian McCaffrey, you think about them being like more run heavy than maybe they actually are. If you go at the end of the season, you'll see that, the Dolphins will be in bottom 10 in drop back rate. The 49ers are dead last every year. You had a stat about that, Rich, that they're dead last pretty much every year, right?
Yeah, I mean, the beautiful thing about both of these systems and the differentiation is like both of these guys, all these guys understand the assignment of getting the football to your best players. Like there's no wasted like Arthur Smith. There's no Jonnu Smith like targets. Like we're not getting the ball to Van Jefferson, right? Like when you look at these coaching trees and you go to their rosters, like these coaches are literally designing to get the football every single game and every single play to the guys that matter. There's no junk script with any of these guys.
Well, and that's kind of the point I wanted to make, is that like I think that we think about them like you would think, okay, maybe this move from, Arthur Smith, who, I mean, the pass rate under expected of Arthur Smith in Atlanta over the last 2 years has been like historic. It's been wild if you look at those numbers. But then you go and look at like So Ben Baldwin's site, RRBSDM, running backs don't matter, .com, has a neutral pass rate frequency stat. And you find in there that the Dolphins are 11th, the 49ers are 14th. If you look at first down in the first 3 quarters in 1-score games, Dolphins 12th in drop back rate, 49ers 9th. And that's what I think I like about these offenses. They do, I think, run the ball more than maybe a nerd would have suggested they do in like, I don't know, in 2016, 17. But I think your point, they're attacking defenses where they need to be attacked now. They're attacking those defenses with their best players. They're getting their best players into space. And I think that's really been the change. And even if we look at Bobby Slowick, who I know that you and I, Rich, and I assume you did, Warren, too, had some issues last year with some of his play calling. Especially, I cannot get over that Panthers game and the fact that the Texans lost that Panthers game and what they did. Like, even he, as they've made their changes this offseason, it seems like they're transitioning. And I think that's ultimately the big thing that's coming out of these. And I'm fascinated, to your point, Rich, what's going to happen now with the defenses? How are we going to see the adjustments to this? Because, obviously all of these defenses adjustments we've seen have been in response to a lot of what we were seeing from, the Chiefs. And we've seen that kill Russell Wilson's career, for instance. And so how are we going to see that continue to develop is really fascinating to me, Warren.
Maybe Deshaun Watson's too.
Well,
yeah.
Yes, that too.
Amongst other things.
Amongst other things, you're absolutely right though. The one interesting thing, like the way that the Dolphins, if you remember, like let's talk about the Dolphins specifically, and I wrote about this a lot in the chapter. One of Mike McDaniel's biggest needs for 2023 was to keep Tua healthy. Because he had missed so many games and had multiple concussions and whatnot, or were they concussions, all this stuff in the 2022 season. So how do we keep him upright? And so they did pivot to more running last season than they had the prior year. They also changed the way that they were running the football as well. They had 160 runs to the ends of the line versus only 94 such runs the prior year. And they were running outside zone at a much higher rate, 11 percentage point more outside zone than they had in 2022. And they were getting the ball out of Tua's hands even quicker. They changed their play action. They cleaned up their play action. They used play action less, which was actually something that I was commenting on in the 2022 chapter that they needed to work on. The 2023 preview book. Entering the season, they need to fix their play action. They did a number of those things that I thought they should be doing in 2023. That actually came to fruition. So that's one other thing that I like about that coaching tree is they seem to, more so than others, spend a lot of time tinkering and modifying and changing. Even though they're sticking to some of their core principles, they're willing to experiment more and to do more things. I mean, that first game last year against the Chargers was so important for the Miami Dolphins for a couple of reasons. Number one, is Tua going to be able to stay on his feet? Number two, Brandon Staley and that defense shut down this Miami Dolphins offense at the end of the 2022 season. And after they went on that 2-game road trip to San Francisco and then to LA versus the Chargers, this offense wasn't the same the rest of the way. And then, of course, Tua on Christmas gets another concussion and misses the rest of the season. That's how the 2022 season ended. So how is it going to start against the same style of defense in 2023, week 1? And Tua goes, I tweeted, like 469 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. He was pressured only 14% of the time because he was getting rid of the ball quickly. And they were also still able to attack deep because of their creativity. And he wasn't sacked at all. So that's a team. The Bobby Slowick, I highly encourage people in the Houston Texans chapter, even if you don't like the Texans, even if they're not your team, go read that chapter. I spent a lot of time writing about the offense for Bobby Slowick, what I liked about it, but how there's so much still room for improvement. And the reason I think it's just really paramount for that offense to make some of these adjustments is because Bobby Slowick rolled in last year, especially so much of the Kyle Shanahan offense to what he was doing, the way he was calling his plays, the timing of how he was calling his plays. But there was one big difference. He did not have the number 1 ranked rush offense. His rush offense was abysmal. And he was still trying to stick too much, in my opinion, to those principles of what Kyle Shanahan was doing. And it was uncanny, some of the rates that he was calling plays matched up identically with what Kyle Shanahan was doing. And I think there needs to be a few more tweaks from Slowick this season, and I comment on some of those, and I suggest some of them in the chapter as to what they can do. They have a different quarterback. They got a quarterback who's got a better arm and better, I think, ability at such a young age in terms of C.J. Stroud. They got better weapons downfield. There need to be some more tweaks that they can utilize with this offense. They don't have a fullback like Kyle Juszczyk. They don't have a tight end like George Kittle. So there's got to be some other tweaks that they use that Kyle wasn't using. And I think Slowick in year 2, if he incorporates those, this is going to be a scary team because they got better on defense and they got better at some of the skill positions than they were last year. So I'm excited to see what the Houston Texans look like this year after exceeding everybody's expectations for them last year.
Yeah, and we talked about the Texans, about how, it's so promising that they saw that they caught lightning in a bottle with C.J. Stroud, who, you've mentioned this before, Rich, and we've talked about this before. He didn't just have a good season for a rookie quarterback. He had a very good just season for any NFL quarterback. And so they caught that lightning, and they're really going out there and trying to, build that offense around them. And the changes that they made, especially bringing in Stephon Diggs, you look at those changes and you think we are going to see a more expansive offense, moving forward this year, which is something obviously that we would like to see, especially the fantasy heads in this call would love to see CJ Stroud throwing a little bit more. Remember, you can find the 2024 preview book. Everything we're talking about in here is in that book. You can find it at sharp.football. Early bird pricing, $5 off, just for a limited time. So make sure you go and check it out now. You brought up Arthur Smith, and talking about the Pittsburgh offense, and I guess in some ways related because of kind of how we expect them to be run, the offense of the Chargers now with Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman. That is, a departure from the staffs that we've been talking about and kind of maybe the philosophies we've been talking about. And I find the Steelers' offense fascinating, Rich, because we talked all last year about Russell Wilson. We called it, you and I dubbed it the James Harden offense, the threes and layups. He's throwing the ball deep or he's checking down. That is what he did. He was second among qualifying quarterbacks in the rate of throws behind the line of scrimmage. He was third in the rate of throws 20 or more yards downfield. Justin Fields finished one spot ahead of Russell Wilson in deep throws. Those are their two quarterbacks that they brought in this offseason. Deontay Johnson works in the intermediate parts of the field. They didn't need him, obviously, anymore, so they traded him away. Their number one wide receiver is now George Pickens, who almost 28% of his career targets have been at least 20 yards downfield. Oh, and he's also good after the catch in short yardage as well. 17th in yards after catch per throw, shorter than 10 yards last season. And you look at all of that, and you could just tell exactly what this offense is going to be. They're going to run the ball. I mentioned Arthur Smith, 11% under expected pass rate in his final two seasons with the Falcons. They're going to take deep shots, and they're going to check down. That is Russell Wilson. That is what he wants to do. And it's going to be interesting to see with this new defense and the way that defense is played now, if that's going to work. And then also in the Chargers, can this Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman, is this going to continue to work as well as it did in, San Francisco when they turned that team around very quickly. So it's just that both of those teams I think are fascinating, Rich.
Yeah, the Steelers in particular are real interesting, and I don't blame them for how cheaply they tried to, revamp this quarterback room. It is very puzzling to try to figure out how this fits in like the current, like I said, the meta, the construct of the NFL where it is right now. Both of these guys are kind of big game hunters. They don't throw over the middle of the field. Also, these are the two of the worst guys in terms of like negative play. Over the past 3 seasons, Justin Fields is 35th in expected points lost on sacks, interceptions, and fumbles out of 38 quarterbacks. Guess who one of the players below him is? There's only 3. One of them is Russell Wilson. The defensive meta has just really kind of killed a guy like Russell Wilson. He, like I said, he wants to extend plays. He wants to push the ball down the field. That's been taken away, in the contract of the Cardinals. I'm curious how this fits with Arthur Smith, because Arthur Smith also, they want to run vertical routes. They want to run the football. They want to run their guys on downfield routes and attack the boundaries of the defense. There was one year in Tennessee where they didn't, where Ryan Tannehill had his breakout and they had A.J. Brown as kind of like that guy that once we're going to play action with Derrick Henry, we're going to throw to A.J. Brown in the middle of the field. His amazing yak ability is just going to go nuts. Do the Steelers have that guy? Can George Pickens be that type of player remains to be seen, because the ancillary wide receivers, it's a very situation like it was last year in Atlanta. I mean, where they had Drake London and a bunch of dudes. It's George Pickens and a bunch of dudes in there, and we probably don't have. We'll see if Pat
some respect on Roman Wilson.
Ow.
Thank you. Put some respect on Roman Wilson's name.
I will not.
Sorry. Thank you.
I will not put any respect on him. The Chargers are more interesting, where I think is, when you think about the iterations of what the Chargers have done and Harbaugh and Roman have done, Justin Herbert, and it's funny that Warren brought up the CJ Stroud things. I was trying to rack in my head all the iterations of the Kyle Shanahan, the Mike Shanahan offense. And is CJ Stroud the actual best quarterback talent to play in that system since John Elway? I think it's actually debatable. And I think when you look at Roman and Harbaugh, like where they've come from, I mean, Justin Herbert is the best quarterback that's played in this system since Andrew Luck in college, like pretty easily. So like, I know that Justin Herbert, I actually feel very strongly that Justin Herbert is going to rival his like best career like rates, I think, in like potentially yards per pass attempt, like EPA per dropback, things like that nature. But is it going to be a situation where Justin Herbert is putting up like a bunch of crazy stats? I also don't believe that as well, because, you know, even if you go back to Andrew Luck, when he had Andrew Luck in Stanford, they only threw the ball 27 times per game as well. So, I mean, it's going to be a complete night and day from what Brandon Staley did. Like going from Brandon Staley to Harbaugh is like polar opposite, right? Like the Chargers are going to play very conservative this year. They're going to put themselves in a situation where they're in a position not to maybe lose games. And it's going to be like kind of that flip. But I'm very curious to see how Harbaugh and Roman kind of adapt their offense to what I believe is the most talented quarterback that either of them have ever had, definitely have had in the pros.
While we're talking about coaches, it only makes sense to transition to the Lions and is Ben Johnson is he the coach of Sharp Football Analysis? Is that can we say that? Is he our favorite coach? Is he your favorite coach, Warren?
No. I mean, I really respect him. He's definitely made a quick come up, but he's not my favorite coach. I still think Kyle Shanahan is my favorite.
We talk about him so much. Like, okay, fair, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, but like I feel like we talk about Ben Johnson a lot. Like we were convinced. I remember we were talking in January. We were like, well, you know, Ben Johnson will be a head coach next year. Like we were all convinced that was going to happen. It seems like, and now the Lions have him for another year, which is obviously great for them. But it feels like maybe we don't know how high we are on him. Maybe we don't know how much we love this man until
the marriage is incredible, right?
Head coaching with the team next year.
Like, I think that's why he hasn't. Well, I think he's waiting to cherry pick the ideal spot he wants to be a head coach. But, like, you know, Dan Campbell, I think Dan Campbell, I'm curious to where you ranked him in the head coach, like, unit rankings that we did him. I almost was trying to make a case for Dan Campbell as number 2 because what Dan Campbell does as a head coach is incredible. He delegates better, I think, than any head coach in the NFL. And he totally gets, like, game theory. And those are the two things. Like I was like, how much do I weigh this in this unit ranking? I almost wanted to put him right behind Andy Reid, because as much as we talk about Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay being kind of wizards at attacking defenses, they have probably cost each of their respective organizations a Super Bowl, at least one. Shanahan's probably cost himself 2 Super Bowls and potentially another visit to one. So the marriage of Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson, I think, is the unison of both of them matters even more.
Well, the thing I think about
us, Ryan McChrystal, you and me, Rich, had Dan Campbell in the top 5. That is how high his prestige has grown. Sorry, Warren.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I mean, the thing that's unique about Dan Campbell is a lot of these defensive mind. So if you're a defensive minded head coach and you got an offensive minded coordinator, OC, like a really strong OC, a lot of times that OC wants to pass the ball a lot. And so then there's butting of heads between the offensive coordinator and the defensive minded. He's not a true defensive minded head coach, but he's not really. Dan Campbell is not obviously an offensive guru here, so he's getting the input. But what works well with them is that Ben Johnson is not trying to pass the ball at ridiculous rates. He's more of a run focused guy. They've got great run schemes, so they have a more balanced offense. Whereas in some cases it hasn't worked. I look at a lot of teams. You know, the Seattle Seahawks, for one, every single coordinator that's come through the door, they're, let's go after this guy, let's go after that guy. They tend to skew a little bit more pass heavy. It doesn't work with Pete Carroll, right? Pete Carroll wants to dial that right back. So that hasn't worked, but it's working in Detroit because Ben Johnson is very creative, but he's not just, I need to pass the ball at one of the highest rates in the NFL, which is what a lot of these coordinators are looking to do right now. I'll jump right just into the 2024 Lions as opposed to like the play calling itself. But the things that excite me about the Lions are they knew what they needed to change. They focused on that in the draft intently. It was their secondary. They drafted cornerbacks first and second in the draft. So they went after exactly their area of need. And one thing ironically about this defense as I was looking through their season is that if they just simply blitzed less frequently, they would be around a league average defense. And this was last year's defense. We saw them struggle a ton when they blitzed. They became one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL when they blitzed. The back half could not cover the guys, and the front half wasn't actually recording sacks. I think they're going to be able to stop the run just as well as they were last season. I think they're going to be able to get more pressure on opposing quarterbacks. I think they're going to have more success in sacking them this upcoming season. And then I think they've got the pieces in the secondary to hold up a little bit better. But I just encourage their coordinators to go look at the splits, look at the chapter, understand kind of my fears, just tone down the blitz rate a little bit. You do not have to be that aggressive. I think your defense is going to be just fine getting pressure with your down linemen. You don't have to send extra rushers. And your secondary and your pass defense is going to be substantially better. I mean, this is one of the highest scoring teams in the NFL last year, but they were barely winning their games. Their margin of victory was so slim because opponents could just pass the ball and get back into these games on them and put up a ton of points against them. So I think if they want to have success and win more games this year, they have to improve that secondary, the pass defense, and reduce their blitzing. I feel confident they've done those things. Issue number 2 that they've addressed is their kicker. No team has made fewer field goals over the last 4 years than the Detroit Lions. Part of that is Dan Campbell loving to go for it on fourth down, but they also have the 25th best make rate on field goal attempts over those last 4 years. So they've been terrible at actually making field goals. Now they bring in Jake Bates, who is really accurate within 50 yards, but he could still bang these from distance. And we saw that last season where he made 7 field goals in one season, 7 from 50 plus yards. The Detroit Lions over the last 4 years combined have only made 10 field goals of 50 plus yards. This kid should be able to give them an added element and weapon that Dan Campbell can hopefully not lean too much on, but utilize as necessary. And then the last but not least is the fact that the Detroit Lions play 14 of their 17 games in domes this season. And their splits are much better when they're inside of a dome, whether that's at home or it's a road dome versus on the road and playing outdoors. They are much better when they play in domes. And they got 14 of their 17 games. Their only true road game that they must play outdoors this year that they don't otherwise have to play, because they're always going to play in Green Bay and they're always going to play in Chicago, is they are playing in San Francisco. So not up north, not somewhere on the East Coast where it could be cold in the wintertime, but San Francisco. And they just played in San Francisco in the NFC Championship game and were on their way to a victory if that game ended at halftime or even in the third quarter. So I think it's an opportunity for the Lions to play really well this year. I do want a really quick hit on something that Rich was saying in our other stream. And that was about like maybe fantasy, maybe points will be higher for fantasy this year. Maybe more players will be able to score this year. And I absolutely think that is going to be the case. Part of the book, at the beginning of the book, which, by the way, 2024 football preview on sale now. Go to sharp.football. You can get it at a discount. The price is going to increase end of this week or next week at some point. So get it for the cheapest price you can right now at sharp.football. 559 pages to get you prepared for the 2024 season. Faster and smarter than any other publication out there, in my opinion. I highly recommend you guys pick up a copy. The 3 of us plus others contributed a lot of time, months and months, to writing this thing. You're going to love it. But one of the introductory articles in that was me understanding how scoring was decreased to start last season. And some of it was what Rich talked about in the other stream, the way defenses were playing these offenses, some of the adjustments they were making, and offense coordinators weren't figuring out the right strategies to attack them quite as quickly. But some of it was the officiating, and that officiating is going to change. It changed last season midway through. They stopped calling those ineligible man down fields, where they called them like almost 3 times a higher rate the first 9 weeks of the season as they did the last 9 weeks of the season. That really decreased. There were some other things that they changed from an officiating perspective. Once I was kind of sitting on my, a soapbox, pounding the table for all these ridiculous things that the refs were doing that was lowering scoring. A lot of those things went away, less offensive holding, et cetera, and more points were there. We do have a great article in the book from Joe Gibbs, a former Washington Redskins head coach. No, not Joe Gibbs, but Joe Gibbs, who's over in Australia right now, but he's a ref expert, and he digs deep into every single team's penalties, penalty situations, penalty issues, strengths and weaknesses on different types of penalties they were prone to commit, how they can correct those, but also some of the new rules that they're rolling out this year and the impacts that those might have on this upcoming season, especially the hip drop tackle, which we will start seeing and having that called in the preseason this year. So if you want to get ahead of the game and understand how that's going to impact this upcoming season in the most in-depth manner possible, it's in the 2024 football preview. Go pick it up.
I do think that is one that, I mean, I don't know if people are paying enough attention to it, but the research from Joe on how many times the NFL said that the hip drop tackle happened last year and how much that penalty, with how many yardage each penalty will be a dramatic effect if they're going to go and call it, 240 times or whatever Roger Goodell said that it happened. So that could be one of those effects. And as we've seen with previous penalties, as you mentioned with an eligible man downfield last year, we do often see a lot of that happening at the beginning of the season. So it's a really interesting look at that and maybe some of the effect of that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the AFC East because I find the AFC East fascinating because there's one team in the AFC East, the Patriots have the lowest, I'm pretty sure still have the lowest win total in the league. Nobody's really expecting much from the New England Patriots. But if you look at the other 3 teams in that division, you have the Buffalo Bills, you have the Miami Dolphins, and you obviously have the New York Jets with we think recovered and healthy Aaron Rodgers. And if you look at all 3 of those teams, you can make a case for all of them being good. But as I was going through the unit rankings, Rich, and I think this is something you and I talked about, I looked at specifically the Bills and the Dolphins, and I looked at their rosters top to bottom, and I don't actually know how good either of those teams actually are. I think they'll probably be fine. Obviously, the Bills have Josh Allen. We love Mike McDaniel. We obviously know the offensive firepower that's available on that Dolphins offense. But looking at the rosters, I was underwhelmed. I think you're kind of in the same boat as I was.
Yeah, and it's not that either team we're saying is going to be bad. We're talking about in context of expectation, right? Like, the Bills have a 10.5 win total, 10.5 game win total. I mean, this is a team that, was 6-6 at one point last year. This is the first year that Josh Allen has his first year in terms of spike, in terms of cap allocation. And we saw some ramifications of that, right? With a number of players that played snaps for them last year. They all weren't great players. Don't get me wrong. Like the Bills didn't purge a lot of great players, but they did purge a lot of snaps from their roster last year. And that could, have a ripple down effect, especially when you think about their offensive line. I mean, their offensive line, they were the healthiest offensive line in the NFL. They had the best injury fortune across the offensive line in the NFL last year too, something that probably won't replicate itself. It's just law of averages, where inversely, the team like the Jets had the worst offensive line luck again. Eventually that's going to turn around for them. It has been 2 years in a row. But the Bills, yeah, I mean, just the amount of snaps they lost and what they're trying to put together in terms of offense, in terms of piecemealing this around Josh Allen. And you could say all right, well, this kind of worked out for the Packers a little bit, but it worked out for the Packers through the draft, more than it had through like signing free agents. And like the Bills are going a different direction. I mean, you bring in Curtis Samuel, who obviously had his best season. You know, we've heard it. He's had his best season with Joe Brady, but this is also a guy who's never had more than 900 yards in an NFL season. And he's going to be 30 years old, like approaching his age 30 season. You're hoping that, you know, Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman make a step up. Can Khalil Shakir in year 3 get a larger role and kind of extrapolate some of the efficiencies he's had on a very small sample? I mean, this is a guy that only has 65 career targets like in two NFL seasons. So it's like, we can't just pencil him in and say he's like a hallmark wide receiver either. They had Marcus Valdes-Scantling, guys like Mac Hollins, the ghost of Andy Isabella, KG Hamler. Like this looks on paper to be the weakest team that Josh Allen has had in terms of surrounding talent since 2019, before they went out and traded for Stephon Diggs. And granted, they still have Josh Allen. He can cover up a lot of it, but there has to be some fragility there. We had them in terms of unit rankings across all of us in aggregate. Like, they're only in the top third of the league in one position, and that's quarterback. And when I seen that, especially paired with them having one of the hardest schedules in the NFL, I mean, I went out and betted that under on their win total. So, you know, hopefully Josh Allen doesn't bone me, make me regret that. But I think there has to be some concern for the Buffalo Bills.
The quarterbacks the Buffalo Bills faced last year, and again, you only played who's in front of you, but this list is absolutely sickening. They played Zach Wilson, Jimmy G, Sam Howell, Tyrod Taylor, Mac Jones, Tim Boyle, Easton Stick, Bailey Zappi, and Russell Wilson. Every single guy that I have listed there is either benched or
those are their wins.
Benched, then cut, traded, or is a backup like that. And that's who they were playing and winning against last football season. It was the 6th easiest schedule of quarterbacks. Then you flip the page and look at who they're going up against this year. And just Aaron Rodgers alone, if they have to play him over, you know, Zach Wilson, is going to be massive. But they also are going to be going up against Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Brock Purdy, of course, CJ Stroud, we mentioned, Trevor Lawrence. They're going to play one of the top 10 most difficult schedules of quarterbacks, and they're doing so with a completely revamped secondary, right? Like, we're talking about all these guys that are playing. They lost Tre'Davious White, Dane Jackson, Jordan Poyer, and Micah Hyde. They're gone. So, I mean, it's going to be difficult, and we know the way that their head coach likes to run the ship, likes to run the show, likes things organized. And if they're not leading in these games, they're going to have to be desperate passing the ball when they don't have the strengths, and their head coach wants them to run the ball a little bit more. He also doesn't want Josh Allen running the football as much because Josh Allen could get injured. And so they were trying to tone that down a little bit, somewhat unsuccessfully. But yeah, I just think it's definitely an interesting season ahead for the Buffalo Bills, a very challenging one at that.
Yeah, I mean, the Dolphins are one of those teams, like we've just seen, like they haven't been able to punch up. That's like, it's like easy to kind of discount them over, you know, where the Bills have, you know, a team that has playoff experience and has been close to a Super Bowl. I mean, the Dolphins have no success under Mike McDaniel against playoff teams, and they haven't had Tua available for all of those games. But even the games Tua has played against playoff teams the past years have been a disaster. He's thrown more than 2 touchdown passes in just one of his games against a team that made the playoffs the past 2 years. So that's kind of where we are. I mean, it makes the Jets like so interesting, right?
No, and that's exactly it. And it's also
to be interesting.
I was also thinking about it from like a win total perspective, because whenever we do our strength of schedule at Sharp Football Analysis, which I think is the best possible version of strength of schedule, but it is based on NFL win totals. And if you're looking at those win totals and you're thinking, well, maybe the Bills aren't as good as we think they are, or maybe the Dolphins aren't as good as we think they are, and you start to look at the teams that those high win totals are affecting their strength of schedule. And so the AFC East this year is playing the AFC South and is playing the NFC West. And I wonder if I'm looking at those teams, maybe their schedule is a little bit easier than we're anticipating, because are the Bills and Dolphins actually as good as we might think they are? It's just an interesting kind of way to think about the interconnectivity of the league when we're talking about these teams. If the Bills aren't as good as we think they are, and the Dolphins aren't as good as we think they are, not only is that good for the Jets, but that's good for every team that's going to play them outside of the division as well. And so it's just an interesting thing. Another team that, as we dug into the unit rankings, you actually went position by position, that I was underwhelmed with, and I think you were underwhelmed with as well, Rich, was the Dallas Cowboys. That I think the way to describe the Dallas Cowboys is this roster roster is just extremely, extremely thin right now.
Yeah, very top heavy, thin and top heavy. Due regression too, kind of in a number of areas. Obviously, they've been due like turnover luck regression. They've been in the very extreme positive of turnover regression. Maybe Dan Quinn actually leaving this year will be what kind of pulls that back. But I'm pretty sure Deron Bland's not going to catch as many touchdowns as Cooper Kupp this year. I feel pretty confident that that's not going to happen again. And then when you just look at this offensive roster, I mean, this is another unit like Dak Prescott and where he is in terms of salary cap allocation. And they haven't even paid CeeDee Lamb yet, who, guess what, is going to get paid before the season starts here. He's not going to show up yet, which still has to happen as well. And it's like, how do they get themselves out of this hole? This is arguably one of the weaker offensive lines on paper Dallas has had, which has been a strength of the team. They're going to be starting a rookie left tackle. We'll see, kind of if there's a transition there. Both of the guards are still really good. Zach Martin, Tyler Smith. Terrence Steele got a big extension, which was kind of not really warranted. I mean, he was 73rd in overall grade amongst right tackles last year. He was 64th in pressure rate allowed. And then you just say, like, heaven forbid CeeDee Lamb miss any time. If CeeDee Lamb misses even, a half of a game, a full game, he has a hamstring or he misses 2 games, this team has absolutely nothing in terms of skill players. The running backs here, this is like one of the worst running back units in the NFL right now. And then behind CeeDee Lamb, you have Brandon Cooks, who has been under 800 yards receiving his past 2 years, will be 31 years old. And you've got Jake Ferguson. And you're hoping, one of the Jalens, Tolbert or Brooks, like steps up and fills like the void that Michael Gallup, who was a shell of himself after the ACL injury, had. Like, this is just this roster is just extremely top heavy. It's supremely fragile. And if their best player, CeeDee Lamb, were to miss any time, the catalyst of this offense, I mean, they've got literally nothing. It was one of the biggest things that I had writing up Dak Prescott, who threw the most touchdowns over expectation in the NFL last year. Like, that's going to come down anyways, even with CeeDee Lamb. So, like, the Cowboys are another team that look very, very fragile on paper.
And it's on defense too. Like you mentioned, they lost the 2 most important parts of the defensive coaching staff. They obviously have Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, who are very good, but they lost the kind of supporting guys that went along with them. Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler actually went with Dan Quinn, and Joe Witt to Washington. The defensive tackle room, I'm sure they're hoping that Mazai Smith becomes what they wanted him to be last year, but he was not good as a rookie. Linebacker situation, obviously Leighton Vander Esch had his health issue. He's no longer there. The starters in the secondary look good, but Stephon Gilmore is gone, and it's thin there as well. And like you said, are we going to expect Bland
ACL?
Diggs coming back from an ACL, or are we going to expect Bland to intercept 1,000 passes like he did? I don't even remember the number. It was wild how many
he had
passes
5 touchdowns
he intercepted. It's wild. And so, yeah, you look at all of that and you say the offense is thin, the defense is thin, and maybe they just get good injury luck and it doesn't matter, because at the top of this roster, there are very, very good players. And as long as those good players are healthy, they're probably going to be fine. But how little depth they have at very important position really worries me about this Cowboys team.
Yeah, the other thing too, they moved from being one of the top 10 cap hits on defense to now I think it's like 25th or 27th in cap hit defensively, which we track in the football preview book. We look at all the different positional cap hits to try to get an understanding of like depth or pieces that were lost and how it has changed year to year. And to your point, I think, Rich, you brought up the turnover regression, and then Ray, you brought up some of the personnel on the defensive side of the football. This team was plus 10 or better in turnover margin for 3 straight years. I went back and looked at historically how often teams were able to kind of replicate that, like a 4th year. Were they ever able to do that? And I think I went back over 30 years, and only 8 other teams besides the Cowboys pulled off triple double-digit turnover margins in their favor for 3 straight years. Only 8 times that happened over 30 years, and all of them did not go 10 plus the next year. And in fact, the average the next year was only +4 in turnover margin. That doesn't sound like that much. 6 turnover margin is pretty significant. And we know that it was massively impactful for them in the past. The last 3 years that I'm talking about here, they've had plus 130 in EPA for their defense just off of turnovers, That's number 1 in the NFL by a massive margin. Think about this. They're at 130. The number 3 best team is at 71. So they're nearly double the number 3 best team They had those 6 return touchdowns on defense plus a special teams touchdown last year, and they're scoring points without their offense even being out on the field. We've got to expect, with slightly worse personnel and a new coordinator and worse coaching potentially, that the defense isn't quite as turnover prone, takeaway heavy, and then that's going to help impact the rest of this team on both sides of the football, because it's going to impact the offense as well. And we know that, now they've got Zeke at running back. And Rich, I'm curious, just, I don't mean to take this off the rails, but as we're talking about the Cowboys, like, what is your impression of Zeke replacing Pollard? Pollard didn't have a good season last year, but we know where Zeke is and what he's been doing there. We were happy to see Zeke go the first time so that Pollard could get more of a shot. What do we see now that Zeke is returning, and how big of a downgrade, or what do you feel is the caliber of that move?
I think in general, the Cowboys are looking at a lot of these issues I talked about and said, so what? They existed last year. And that's like the wrong way to approach things. Like, just because like you got by with it doesn't mean you're going to continue to get by with it. And I talked about some of the regression, just like the offense is going to inherently have, especially from like passing touchdowns. I've been under the impression that I don't think the Cowboys running back room is like a complete product. I don't know if that means at some point and they sign someone else, but like a Khalil Herbert or a Miles Sanders or someone like that. But it's definitely, when you look at Ezekiel Elliott, where he is in the terms of the age spectrum and coming off of basically career lows in efficiency, granted with the New England Patriots, but there's a reason they also let him go the year prior as well. So like, I don't think he's the answer. I don't think they even believe internally that he's the answer. And Rico Dowdle, you have to go back to high school since he went over 1,000 yards. So it's just
Rico
real
Dowdle
tough.
season. This is a Rico Dowdle podcast.
It's just real tough to believe that like they have answers here. And like I said, if CeeDee Lamb misses any time, this is one part of the reason why I wrote up like Dak as being kind of someone like I was kind of not really as greatly into from a fantasy football perspective. It's just like it's so fragile, and the surrounding circumstances around him. So it's really tough. I think out of the top quarterbacks, he has basically the worst like offensive surroundings. I mean, even worse than what we talked about with Josh Allen being able to punch up. Because at least we know Josh Allen's going to run around and create his own offense.
At least they drafted that like 30-year-old wide receiver in the 6th round. Is that how old Ryan?
Ryan
How
Flournoy,
old is Ryan?
yeah.
Is it Flournoy?
Like,
how old is he?
He's 25-year-old rookie, but
25-year-old rookie. I read that in Ryan's draft class recap of the Cowboys, which obviously you could find in the 2024 football preview, available at sharp.football early bird special going.
And the rest of that division probably got
days.
better. Like, I think you make a case that all 3 of the other teams in that division got better, and we didn't talk about it in the coaching segment, but the Eagles moving on from Brian Johnson after one season to Kellen Moore, and you can say what you want about Kellen Moore, but at least he's going to improve on what was a stale passing game that used no play, had a severe reduction in play action and pre-snap motion, losing Shane Steichen. Those things are going to spike again too. And then the Commanders and Giants look like they also got better.
Yeah, we said about the Eagles heading into last year, we said this team is going to regress because they lost both their coordinators. And they absolutely did. I think they felt too confident in what they had inside the building that they could just promote from within and just get back to the Super Bowl and do something more. We don't need those guys. We don't love Jonathan Gannon anyways. Well, turns out the guys they were promoting were not capable of getting it done. And so guess what? Now they go mercenary style outside the building, bring in 2 hired guns who are going to be able to operate this offense differently and hopefully better for their case. And you're right. I think both the other teams there, the Giants who are on Hard Knocks, and that's been fun to watch. Old Dave's and his staff over there, and then the Washington Commanders as well, with a new quarterback, totally new coaching staff, Dan Quinn, and bringing on a lot of new defensive pieces there to plug some of the holes. They can't be much worse than they've been under Ron Rivera. Let's just put it that way.
You mentioned the new coordinator. I mean, we've been talking about the new defensive meta. I mean, Vic Fangio, like is he the godfather of the defenses that we're seeing now? Is like kind of that way we've seen with Brandon Staley and him. Like I think they've improved there. The Giants, I want to mention the Giants are our free chapter. And I think one of the reasons we made them the free chapter is because they're definitely on Hard Knocks. They're getting a lot of attention. But one of the other reasons is I think that none of us are predicting the Giants are going to be great. I think that we think it's very likely they will be moving on from Daniel Jones after this year. But when I read your chapter with the Giants, Warren, there was a lot more positivity in there, I guess, than I thought there was going to be. Does that seem fair for where the Giants are right now?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I didn't approach the start of the chapter thinking that this was going to be a very positive chapter. But then when I looked at it, the fact that this team, this was a little bit the way that I felt about the team. All these teams are melding together. There's another team I felt a similar way about. I think it was the Jets, just with Robert Saleh.
Yeah.
How he could get these teams to still win games late in the season. Now, ironically, it was bad for their draft stock, so I get that. But they were playing and beating some of these playoff caliber teams down the stretch of the year with ridiculous quarterback play. I mean, the quarterback play was atrocious. The offensive line, they were minus 51 in sack margin, which is insanity. I've never seen any team that was minus 51 in sack margin. We went back all the way to 2000. It's never existed before in the NFL. The next closest team is minus 41. I had to go and
look up the sack number. I told you I had to go and look up their sack number because it was 85, right? They gave up 85 sacks last year. That's I thought you had mistyped it because I knew that they had given up a lot of sacks. I didn't know what the number was. I went and checked it in 3 different sources. That is a wild number of sacks to give up. It's the most. It's the second most all time, right? Isn't that the number? It's the second most sacks all time that they've given up.
Second most all time, absolutely. I mean, and you can't operate an offense like this. My fear, though, is with Daniel Jones coming back, and I was getting on Joe Shane's case a little bit with regard to his quote during Hard Knocks about how, Patrick Mahomes wouldn't have success behind this offensive line either. Yes, you do need a good offensive line if you want to be able to protect your quarterback, but your quarterback controls a lot of that pressure as well. His checks pre-snap, what he's checking the play to, what he's doing with his protection based upon his study of the defense and what he anticipates coming, and is he right most of the time? That's going to go a long way to giving him enough time to get rid of the ball before he's actually getting pressured. And then post-snap, once the ball is snapped, how quickly is it diagnosing where the rushes are coming from and how well his offensive line might be able to handle that so that he can move about in the pocket, and how quickly is he getting through his progressions. There are so many things that quarterbacks can do that help them, whether they're to avoid being pressured or to get rid of the ball when you are being pressured before you are sacked. And that's a huge talent right there. That last one, how frequently can you get rid of the ball when you're being pressured to avoid a sack? And Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen rank up at the top of the list of doing that. And Daniel Jones, even pre-knee injury, ranked one of the worst in the NFL. And I'm not even talking about just this last season when the offensive line was a train wreck for some weeks. I'm talking about last season as well. So they have to figure out coaching-wise, this guy's weaknesses. How do we coach him so that he's getting rid of the ball and not eating these types of sacks, because they will kill them. But that's my fear, is off of the knee injury, is he going to be reluctant? And the other fear is that when I went back and looked at that unfortunate, now in my mind, 2022 season, where I was super happy that Dave Ball won Coach of the Year and the Giants not only made the playoffs but won a playoff game, Daniel Jones was not good as a passer. He threw 15 touchdowns that season. He was terrible actually throwing the football. Where they were winning games is he wasn't turning the ball over. They were getting down into the red zone, spreading out the defense and running their running backs more. And the rest of the field, Daniel Jones was using his legs at a fairly high rate to gain EPA. It wasn't coming on his arm. And so if he's not going to run quite as much, and if he's going to be hesitant as a runner, and if he's taking too many sacks, I mean, this team is going to be a little better than last year, but not that much. But I have confidence that this team was better than they looked last year because of so many things that were going against them. They won 6 games in a season that was totally shot. I mean, they started 1-5, then I think at one point they were like 2-9 or something like that, 2-10. They could have just packed up and done nothing. They somehow came back and won, I want to say, 4 of the last 6 games. They would have won against the LA Rams. In fact, if Tyrod Taylor doesn't throw the 2-point conversion behind Saquon Barkley's back, that was a walk-in 2-point conversion. They lost 26-25. They would have won 27-26. That was literally the final play of the game. So this is a team that absolutely could have won potentially 9 games last year, as crappy as they were. So I don't think that this is their year. I really want to see Daboll get a quarterback who I think is actually a potentially good quarterback to mold him. We saw what he did with Josh Allen. People, before Daboll really started working with Josh Allen a ton, we saw what Josh Allen was entering the NFL. And then Daboll was able to work with him and get into this level. Now, it's not all on Daboll, right? Josh Allen's a freak, and he's proven that. But Daboll brought the best out of him and coached him in a way that I think helped him a ton. Daboll's had a lot of success with quarterbacks at various different stops along the way. And this could be one of the worst that he's dealt with. Because if you remember, like he was at Jalen Hurts and Tua down in Bama. He's Josh Allen. And now he's at Daniel Jones. And so, for him, I want to see him get a good quarterback. But the Giants are going to be better than they were last year. I like their defensive coordinator. Tennessee's had a really underrated defense. They've had a good defense. I liked a lot of their strategy. That's their defensive coordinator now. He was the defensive coordinator from the Tennessee Titans. And I'm excited to see that side of the football because they got Brian Burns. They made some other improvements there. But the Commanders, the Eagles will all be better this year. And as we mentioned, putting a bow on it, the Dallas Cowboys should be a little worse.
Yeah, I did say more positive. I definitely didn't say positive. More positive than I expected. By the way, that Giants chapter is completely free. You can also find that at sharpfootballanalysis.com. If you're not sure about the book, you want to see what the chapters are about. The entire Giants chapter, completely free, over at Sharp Football Analysis. Go and check that out. And I think after you read it, you're going to want to see what we say about every single other team. I want to finish up here with something I was thinking about. And it's the Commanders come to mind here because the Commanders, I didn't list them as this team, but the Commanders are one of these teams for me. I was looking at my notes last year for this exact podcast episode we did. And at this time last year, I was convinced the Rams would be awful. And I was obviously very, very wrong about that. By the end of the year, I thought Sean McVay should have been coach of the year. He did a great job. They hit on a great rookie class, and their team ended up being, Matthew Stafford bounced back. Obviously, they got Puka Nacua, and it ended up being much better. And so I was dead wrong on the Rams, and I will happily take whatever cold takes exposed or whatever you would like to do with me on the Rams. But I think that that happens in the NFL every single year. Is one of these teams that we think is going to be bad, and we look at their roster, we don't know how good they're going to be. Shows up and surprises. Maybe if they do get a good rookie class, maybe they get improvement from young players. Maybe they get a new coaching staff to come in and they surprise in that way. So thinking about that, I actually have two teams for me, and I can get started if you want more time to think about it. But thinking about that, we'll go to you, Rich, if you've got one. Are there any kind of surprise? No, Warren, you got any of these surprise teams that you think might be a little bit better than you thought to begin with?
Well, you go ahead and start. It sounds like
I'm going to start with the Cardinals. I'm going to start with the Arizona Cardinals. Because they have a 7.5 win total. You can get 6.5 somewhere. That's actually where it opened, was 6.5. But it's juiced to the over. People have been betting the over, so this is not a hot take by any stretch of the imagination. But I think when you go back and look at the Cardinals last season and what they were able to do, even before Kyler Murray was back, they just hung around in way more games than they should have. They beat the Cowboys, right? And they hung around a lot of games. They were frisky every single week, and that is, as you kind of mentioned with the Giants at the end of last year and the Jets throughout these years with terrible quarterback play, what they've been able to do on the defensive side, that says something, I think, about coaching of what they were able to do with a very, very, very bad roster last year. After Kyler Murray comes back, they were 3-5. They didn't have a great point differential, but I mean, minus 36 in those 8 games isn't terrible, especially with how bad their defense was. They ended up with wins against the Steelers, wins against the Eagles. You look at that run, that 3-5 run, that's actually pretty good for the team, where they were. The defense isn't going to be good this year, but I do think it's going to be better. I don't even think you could argue that it's going to be worse with some of the additions they made in the offseason. Kyler Murray is going to be healthier. They have Marvin Harrison Jr. Drew Petzing, I don't know if he's getting the credit he deserves, but what they were able to do with the running back run game last year, even with Kyler not there and no real threat of a run, was unbelievable. And I'm buying all the stock in Petzing that I can. So I really like that offensive coaching staff. And so I look at all of it. I wish they played in an easier division. I wish that their defense was going to be better, but things are definitely moving in the right direction here with the Cardinals. And I could the Seahawks take a step back? Could the Rams, Matthew Stafford suffer an injury and they take a little bit of a step back and the Cardinals ended up second in this division? That wouldn't shock me. And I think that, that would have shocked me going into the kind of really digging into this roster. But now I don't really think that would shock me.
That's
Thoughts,
fair.
concerns?
Yeah, I think the one concern is the schedule. But I like the Cardinals. I was impressed when I went back and studied what they did last year, considering Kyler Murray coming back from injury. And the only issue that I have, like, we only saw Kyler Murray down the tail end, and he usually is only able to play like a certain number of games healthy, and then he ends up getting injured. Last year, we never saw that because he didn't start the season until just over halfway through, I think. So it's always a concern for me as to like what Kyler Murray's health is going to be down the back half of the season. But they were absolutely a team that, looking back at some of the stats and then looking back at just some of the places that they ranked, I was impressed by what I saw compared to what my expectations were for them heading into the season. And I think we bet their under last year and it hit. But they made it a lot closer than what I was anticipating it was going to be. So I've done nothing with their futures. I'm going to punt on answering your question until we do another podcast. That's another thing to share with some of the people here is that I plan to be coming on the podcast more frequently through the rest of this summer, and we're going to be hitting a lot of these topics. So a few quick things before Rich maybe shares one of his takes. I want to mention, number one, if you haven't bought the 2024 football preview, we just published it less than 24 hours ago. It's live. It's up at sharp.football or sharpfootballanalysis.com. It's 559 pages. It's going to get you ready for the season. I highly recommend you go get it, and I highly recommend you do so soon because you're going to be able to do it for a cheaper price. Second, my pinned tweet on Twitter or X, whatever, at sharpfootball is my handle. Quote tweet the pinned tweet with something about the book. My pin tweet is about the book. Quote tweet that. We will be giving away within an hour of this show ending. We will give away 2 copies for free of that PDF. So if you've already bought it, we'll just refund you. But we'll reach out to you via Twitter DM. So quote tweet the pin tweet on my timeline, and you will be able to be entered to win a copy of the book. And then another announcement. We're going to be giving away a number of printed books throughout the course of the rest of the summer. You guys want to get your hands on them. Too costly for us to mass produce them, but we're just going to be dropping free books left and right. You'll see it on your timelines. Get ready for it. You got to be following us, got to be following the site handle, and we'll be doing it both on some podcasts as well as some giveaway contests, printed copies of the book. I myself don't even have one. This is what last year's book looked like. This is how thick last year's book was. It's absolutely amazing. This year's book is even longer than this. So we are going to be giving some of these away for free. You need to buy the PDF, and that's going to be your pathway to winning a free printed book, which we'll be doing. So sorry to steal some promo time in there, Ray, but I will punt.
That's the point.
Answer on some of the teams that I think have bigger expectations this year than we currently have for them. I already talked about the Detroit Lions earlier, but they're not like one of these bottom tier teams that we think might do better. I got a couple. We'll get to them in a couple of weeks though.
Yeah, we'll talk about the win total draft. I'll save my second one. I really just wanted to talk about the second one to see how strong Rich's reaction would be to the other side of this, because the team is the Broncos, and I want you to hear me out, Rich, on the Broncos over 5.5 wins. But that'll be a conversation. That'll be a conversation that we talk about in the future. Warren, I mean, put a good bow on this with what we're doing here with the preview book. Go and check the preview book out. We put so much work into it. Everybody here put so much work into it, and we're very proud of it. Over at sharp.football, go and check that out. And as Warren said, subscribe to this podcast. There's going to be a lot of podcast episodes coming out in the near future as we move here to the season. Just a few weeks remaining for the season. There's a ton of content available at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Rich is going to be publishing an article almost every day, starting now until the end of the season, as part of our fantasy football draft kit. Make sure you go and check out the draft kit. You can actually bundle the draft kit with our regular season content that includes all of Rich's worksheet previews, a comprehensive preview of every game. There's a ton of stuff over at Sharp Football Analysis. Go and check it out. subscribe to this feed, and we'll be back to talk with you real soon.